Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world. Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Decoding AQ. With me today from Virginia in the US, I have Alan Susi. So welcome.
Thanks for having me, Ross.
So Alan is the global head of organizational effectiveness at S&P Global. He's been there for a couple of years. We're going to dive into some exciting adventures that he's been on there. It's a public company employing over 35,000 people. And as we'll learn, was involved in the largest merger in history, maybe, or largest merger, certainly.
Pandemic year, I guess.
In the pandemic year, so a monster merger. So we're going to learn a little bit about that. And essentially, Alan is experienced all around the talent and organization strategist. He's focused on building these collaborative, people-first strategies. So I think it's going to be really helpful to dive into there. Before your time at S&P, you've spent many years in various HR leadership roles, including over a decade at Fannie Mae, which is a housing firm in both the financing and helping people with their housing needs. I think, Alan, did your life start off, a degree in communications and sociology with then a master's in strategic management, but you're really, truly passionate about innovative business model design and then the optimization of an organization and its talent to essentially make sure we can sustain growth and high performance. So my first question actually for you, Alan, is around this monster merger, related to this essential intelligence project that has consumed your life, I think, for the last couple of years. My question is, what was the most unexpected aspect of that merger from a people perspective, Alan?
It's a great question, and that we're just getting right into it. I love it. The most unexpected aspect of this merger probably was how the pandemic could positively benefit the integration of these two companies. If you were to say, hey, we are in a pandemic and we should go have the largest merger in the world during that time, it might not be your strategy as an organization in whatever industry you're in. With that fact, the rolling out of the vaccines, the Great Resignation starts right after we announced the merger. So all of a sudden, people are leaving and workplaces are changing. But what we found was that because we were working remote, two organizations, you actually could collaborate a lot more. Where that's not normal in kind of an integration of companies this size. So we got to work together a lot virtually on the same ground. So it was very equal footing. So it was a merger of equals. We were able to dive into details in a stronger way. We talked about our culture more. So it didn't feel like, oh, S&P is acquiring IHS Markit. It wasn't that. It was actually, we have some common ground in this, this proverbial 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing that you look for with M&A. I think really was able to manifest pretty organically because we were on this unique footing in this really weird once in a lifetime situation.
I think it's interesting, isn't it, where we can observe an event from various different perspectives. And some show up with, more light and more noise, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. If there are these opportunities of, hey, this has happened, how can we leverage that to our advantage? We're on equal footing, we can collaborate more, we can do all of these things. And that spiral effect of a culture during what could be a really traumatic, really challenging situation of adaptation, of change, the meeting of two complex things, these organizations full of teams and people and things, and try and say, okay, now we're going to see what works, what doesn't work. So if that was unexpected, it came along the pandemic and you leveraged it well. What are some of the things now, maybe a little bit further onto that project, a couple of years in, would you have redone or rethought slightly differently about a merger of that size in that situation and trying with this people first agenda when, yes, you're very remote and all of those things? Is there anything that you might have done slightly differently with what you know now?
It's a real challenge for in the US, we refer to it as Monday morning quarterbacking, of looking backwards and saying, oh man, what would I do differently? I think how we took on the future of work, or how we took on what is our workplace of the future, right? Because we're looking at our real estate footprint, we're looking at all the cities and countries that we operate in as a combined entity. I think we probably would have spent a little bit more time on that, but because our people first approach is so human centric, we really levered on listening to the employees from both organizations. And it was more, we want more autonomy. We want to be able to feel our way through this. But that's kind of picking nits, because ultimately, I think, you deal with the hand that you're dealt during this crazy time, because it was just one thing after another, trying to get it done. But we're learning from that now, and we have what we call an anchor flex model. But that's allowed us to have people that still are coming together. They don't have to go to one office or another. They're still working in this norm of 80% of their time they're being spent on Zooms, and still doing that same collaborative engagement, that I think has kept the silo down. Maybe we could have forced more, how can we get together in person better? But again, I think we solved it by thinking collaboratively.
I think one of the things that we can learn differently is this fact of, as you mentioned, hey, this quarterbacking, looking back to rethink to how might that inform decisions of tomorrow. Right. And we've often used that as strategies, right? We look back at something, what worked, what didn't work, and then we either repeat or ditch. Right. I think one of the challenges we're facing right now is the relevancy of that look back, because tomorrow's not as predictable as it used to be, where, hey, it's going to be similar to what it was, therefore looking back's a helpful thing. Yeah. So one of the realities is that we're in a world of learn by doing. We don't know what's coming next, from thinking long term but planning short, and how we can go from reaction to actually being in a state of respond, so that we can calculate what's going on and be adaptable to leverage those situations, even at an organizational level. So right. I think what will be interesting is, whilst there's been that massive change across these two organizations coming into one, what has been maybe some of your most delightful parts of where you've taken that individual nature, human-centric, people first, that has now manifested into more organizational wide things, and how it's impacted the organization's new thinking?
Yeah, it manifests, and I think I'll continue down that path around the way we work in the future, is that we didn't have any leader going out and saying, thou shalt, right? There's none of that. It's more, let's explore and investigate, and your personal preference on work does obviously need to coordinate with the team, the type of work you do. But we're going to start with trusting you as an employee or a person. We refer to people like they're just people. Let the person choose what the right work is in coordination with their team, and then evolve from there. And that was something that we continue to do today. But it's really, really, I think, been delightful to be able to see. So when we think about what's the right organizational structure, right? Two organizations, you're going to have to design how the work gets done. Well, we can start from that people-centric position. I'm not going to architect a function through rigid hierarchies and locations. It's like, well, what's the best way we can work together? Do these people have the right skill sets? So we're seeing leaders make good decisions about their teams, their organizations, and build in that adaptability to say, hey, it's right for right now. We're people-centric, but as we learn, do we need to readjust the plan, the workforce plan? Do we need to readjust how we design the org by listening and by adapting?
And I guess it's the difference of phases of the organizational design, where we, in the history, leveraged things like knowledge. Knowing was an advantage. Now it's how quickly can we learn? How quickly can we experiment? And do we have the ability to readjust and unlearn? Even if we've set a course and we're getting indications of some data that says we need to shift, are we grown up enough to be able to say, it's new information now. Now we're going to go across here. And I guess as an organization that is all around intelligence, critical decision making, where have you found the balance between data and looking at data and trying to predict, and then things that you just don't know what the data is yet, or we're trying to imagine or experiment? How do you balance? Maybe are they tension points, or is that a joyful place? What's been your experience in that, Alan?
We've spent a lot of time thinking about this as taking insights and then turning them into action or interventions. But it really, to me, gets to giving the leadership or your people enough guidance for them to make an informed decision. We really, like I said, we never did a thou shalt, because that felt like it was biased. And so we try to bring our data forward in a way, and we have work to do, especially as a new organization, but to bring it forward, to give those insights, to say, this is what happened in the past, a little bit of hindsight, a little bit of insight of what's going on right now. But if we understand best practices and benchmarks and using our essential intelligence to bring that and say, hey, we feel like this informs well enough for some guidance that you can make in the future while holding true to your people first adaptability, that you can make a prudent call about your organization, about your team, about your business. That's been how we've really tried to use data to our advantage. And that's literally what I think we do really well with our business. We give them that information. We say, hey, on this platform, it's there for you. If you need our advisory support or our specific workflows and solutions, we can do that. But let's start with the right hindsight and the right insight.
Yeah. And I imagine, this balance between here's insights, here's information. We're now trying to predict with foresight, but we're doing that through the lens of these principles and giving freedom. And therefore that freedom, with it comes the, challenge and difficulty of being able to make a decision, because that's, sometimes difficult to make one, but also how does the system work if those decisions don't give the outcome that they were aiming for? What's in place to allow that safety? People call psychological safety in teams. Can we, in an experimental world, you need to have these systems in place that allow targets not to be hit, goals not to be hit, and then when it goes in the learning column. So what are sort of more the practical system elements that have been put in place that enable that culture to not just be a concept or theory, but in reality follow through?
So I think from a people program perspective or an HR program perspective, we've really reframed performance management in a way that we refer to as the Thrive experience, the Thrive performance experience. And so it takes away any sort of rigid, we are going to have performance ratings. In fact, it turns it in, and it's going to be on an annual basis, and you're going to do these things like the static performance management process that we probably all know and quite loathe, I think, in most companies. For us, we're saying let's get to iterative engagement. So let's have career conversations, let's have performance conversations that align to your objectives and key results, right? So goals, key results, what's happening in building in this continuous engagement, so that you don't go down too far a path and say, oh, you didn't hit that mark 6 months ago. Or if in the inverse, there's a recency bias, you delivered that one thing in November and I assess you in January and it's all roses, but you actually didn't do anything for the first 10 months of the year. We got away from that so that we can pivot very quickly when we're not meeting a mark. And leaders can actually look at their dashboards and scorecards and be able to say, hey, I need to have that conversation quicker. And it's not a bias. It's not an overarching forced discussion. It's more, hey, we need to evolve, or we didn't hit the mark here. What new products do we need to build? How do we need to collaborate better internally? So that's how we've really tried to do it at S&P Global, is say it's again a very people first thing. We heard that from our people from both organizations. But then you start building up those other elements of the organization to say, well, when you're doing OKRs, your style of OKRs, right? What does your team need? It's different in sales than it is in technology. That's a very different way of managing your work.
So what I'm hearing then, Alan, is that whilst there are some frameworks to shift, whether it's OKRs, whether it's some of the language, but also the principles of getting closer to real time, it's the Ken Blanchett, catch them in the moment, catch them doing it right, the 1 minute match, those kind of aspects, but at scale. And then also the flexibility to apply those frameworks to the relative adaptions needed for different culture of a department or section or area. So I guess the pendulum that moves around between, no, we need consistency, we need everybody to do everything the same, to the chaos of everything's adapted to its unique individual. Do you have a view of where that needs to sit right now for organizations, between this hyper personalization, real time, totally making pivots, decisions on a hourly basis, daily basis, to the maybe annual, too slow? Do you feel there's something emerging from your experience?
I think there is. For us, is it driving value? And if it's not driving value, we should probably investigate if it's still needed. So I use our Thrive performance experience as an example. We weren't using rigid performance management in a way that we felt was valuable. And I think that was the great part of the connection of the two organizations. Prior, the legacy IHS Markit folks felt the same way, and they were making moves in a similar fashion, just like I think a number of companies are doing. But for us, it had to, is there an ROI on the work that's being done? But giving that autonomy and flexibility for a technology team to operate in a technical, agile way, right? How they integrate their product and technology work versus a sales team who may have quotas and may have to go out and do big deals, and they're focusing on recurring revenue. It's a very different engagement. So why should I force something that is not driving value in one place for another? And that's where we said, well, the unifying experience needs to be continuous engagement, continuous performance with your people leader. And it's through career conversations and coaching rather than some rigid norm that no one really got the value from, that they probably, maybe but a few people might have actually been.
Maybe. I think the phases that we're going through, where management and having management and management structure gave growth to the economy. Now, I think perhaps the focus on coaching is the next phase of growth. So it's less around the management of the rigid structure of a outcome and performance in that way, versus a coaching performance that's more human-centric around. And I like your definition there of thriving, in terms of that word, as opposed to engagement or these sorts of things. Could you explain for us, Alan, what does thriving actually look like? Because everyone might have a different perception of that. Is that just about, hey, I'm not stressed, I'm not burnout, I'm happy, but it's kind of driven? What's thriving in S&P world?
I think for us, thriving is that you understand your people experience. You are feeling like you're connected to the purpose of the organization, and that your work, I think you used the word earlier, that you can get into the flow of your work. So if someone is impassioned, someone understands the purpose and feels like they have the autonomy to do their job, and they're being enabled and coached, then we think that thriving performance experience is really going to manifest. And the way we look at it, taking a step back universally, is we need to also have the resilience of our organization to be able to operate in certain ways. And so, I do not really like the idea of quiet quitting. I know that's the topic du jour, but what we want people, if we feel like they're connected to our purpose and they can do their job well, they're going to thrive. They're going to deliver the value that we would expect, and probably then some. And a lot of data around employee engagement and people experience kind of indicate that as a pretty core thing, to the point where our chief purpose officer, Dimitra Manis, she is the purpose officer. We have taken it a step beyond not just focusing on our people, but how do our people connect to the work that we do? And that manifests in every corner of our organization. And if people are thriving, that purpose probably plays a pretty darn big part of that experience.
That. But I think the reality for most of the human experience is we can very easily go from thriving to despair in a given day, right? And so we're trying to, look at and measure something that is very much a moving feast. And so the trend, an upward trend, that we are a paradox ourselves. We want certainty and we like novelty, and we want things not to change and we want them to change. And so providing thriving is as much a mindset and a perspective as it is the reality of something. And I'm curious, have you seen, I wrote about it in my book about hysteria and mass hysteria, about how we can never see an event, but see someone who's seen that event and it consume my emotional state. And I was talking about in the book, how can we use that to our advantage to create positive hysteria, mass hysteria in a positive way? Have you seen that in thriving, in terms of where people are doing it? Does it spread like a virus to others? And not a downward spiral, but an upward spiral if you start to manifest that around. I'm just curious as to your experience of looking at it, identifying it, monitoring it, and planting the seeds for it. What's been some of the results from that?
For us, with thriving, I think it's a lot. I referenced the organizational resilience, the individual resilience. If you're having regular conversations and people feel connected, that's great for those individuals. But the way that I see it end up connecting across these kind of network nodes is trust and transparency. So, going through a merger of our size, there's always questions around what's the overlap? Is my job safe, right? And we continually improved our people policies, our people first programs. We're up to 9.0 right now in terms of those benefits. But we were able to have honest conversations with folks to say, hey, yeah, there are going to be jobs that are going to be impacted. There is in every merger and acquisition, but we're going to commit to trying to redeploy folks into jobs. We're going to make sure that we are as prudent as possible. We're going to, focus on how is all of our attrition driving a more prudent workforce plan, right? So we get into how org effectiveness does it, and people then trust if they're having honest conversations with their leader, say, yeah, they're telling me in real time when these types of things happen, or, oh, I'm seeing this organization evolve. I want to get in on that, and it really does manifest through the network.
It's interesting because one of our clients we've worked with now for a few years is a big construction firm in the US. They're like third or fourth largest engineering construction firm, and they grow by acquisition a lot of the time. So every year they'll do 5 or 6 big acquisitions. And they've been using our platform to try and help with that process, right? It's a big change people go through. And where it looks at resilience, at stress, at, team support, all of these different aspects. But what you picked up on there, I wanted to just have a little explore of. And it's this concept of redundancy, and there's going to be, job change, job role restructuring. And the way they've started to position it is it's not about that person, but it's about those tasks, or it's about those roles. And therefore, employee mobility, how can we shift and plan and support through that process, that it's not, oh, no, we don't need that anymore. Oh, well, what could we redeploy? No, that is part of the whole endeavor, is that those tasks need to be, and it's become beyond the merger to the culture of the company, that we're looking at task redundancy, not person redundancy or role redundancy type thing. And I just really liked that whole approach. I thought it was quite interesting in the positioning and language. Have you had a process of mapping to get the benefit of employee mobility? And if so, what does that really look like? I'd be fascinated to know, Alan.
Yeah, I think our approach is very much in the same vein of, we built our combined organization based off of the skills, a skills-based workforce plan or a responsibilities-based workforce plan. So when we're designing the orgs, we made functional decisions that we thought would make sense. But we've always talked about giving people a career journey that might manifest in a division or function, but should manifest across all of S&P Global. And that means saying, hey, I might not have every skill you need, but I have transferable skills. So we're really building that into our combined compensation and job structure. But we're also doing it as it relates to roles that may have to go away, or in where we're growing. And we have a federated learning model that really brings in commercial development and technology development into a place where we support it in a people team, but we allow those subject matter experts to kind of really focus their development plan around those core concepts, which creates a network node that then you can say, oh, I might be in this division, but they need more of that. Or my skill that was latent here is actually forward leaning there. That's really impactful. So a big focus, I think, going forward for us will be, continuing to always increase that internal mobility. And it's also just a value creator to the organization as a whole, right? It brings value to our business.
100%, doesn't it? The realization in the era of massive change, of the great, redesign, reorganization, whatever term you want to have around there, is being able to find that experience that, is retention historically from a commercial head. I want that. And yet when we look at other models like the film industry, for example, they have a collective around a big event. They all come in, thousands of people, from costume designers to this to whatever. They come, they produce the things and they go away. They do other bits. And it's not, oh, I need to retain them. But if they get on well, they'll rally around a new thing. And so I think this redesign of work from, it costs so much for organizations to find, on board, develop, that they want to retain them. And when they lose, they see that as a negative, as a loss. What if we rethought that whole equation to make it that it's easy to come in and out, that we can have portfolio careers? Isn't that better if, yes, it can be under large organizations as one house, and that mobility of moving around then still has some sense of lifetime value for each person involved. But I think there's maybe an opportunity over the years to come to be more open source to that across different industries, across different things. And that might seem scary for some and exciting for others. Do you have a view on that, Alan?
Yeah, it's often referenced in the people landscape around like a talent marketplace. I think for us, it's again that transparency around we want you as an S&P Global employee to feel like you have a home, and we know like the cost benefit of keeping someone is fantastic. That's why we are levering really hard on our people first experiences. We want you as a person. We will develop a core skill as necessary, but we hire you for your behaviors and for your knowledge, less so than for some critical core technical skill. We know we can develop those, and we found that even in a time of massive stress, like a pandemic, like the Great Resignation, like a merger, we still retained better than the market, right? That's pretty impressive, where you're combining, to a 35,000 person plus organization, and you can confidently say that our retention is below norm. Like that's cool.
A big deal. Yeah, that's a big thing. And I think there's a difference, isn't there, in the mentality of, I've got my herd and I'm going to put the fences around and make sure that all the, gates are shut, versus all the gates are open, but they choose to be here. And we should be focusing on the nourishing soil and the green grass in our plot, not on the fences and the, reasons to say when they're always, oh, maybe over there, or there looks nice. Is focus on getting the core right. And then everyone will want to stay there, even when it's no fences.
We try to get out of the way of all of that. So we have a 0 days policy to go to your next job.
Just say that again. Say that again.
0 days. If you move to one job, you could go apply for the next role if it doesn't feel right for you. You can move
internally. You can move role and move job with a 0 day.
Right. Because
Wow.
why should we put some arbitrary fence up in between different teams if it's not working? Now, if it isn't working for a reason, we should explore why it's not working on that team. But if your development needs to happen in different ways or in different timelines, that creates more of that marketplace that I can move within S&P Global to different roles, to different divisions. That's
Tell
pretty
me,
powerful.
tell me more about that. When did it come in? How's it been used? Is it still in pilot phase, figuring out, or it's now, no, this is until we find the next, this is a key
It's
piece.
one of our people first programs.
Wow.
We have people first 1.0, 2.0. I think it was people first 2 or 3.0, where we looked at the landscape, heard our people team and said, why do we have 6 months in role before I can look for the next job? And we instituted it, got rid of a policy that we didn't think made sense. And now if I start a role tomorrow and I move, this is not right for me and I want to move a month from now, I could go start applying for other internal roles.
Do you have any data around that in terms of how much that's been taken up, whether or not that has maybe, it could be a correlation, it could be a causation that has helped your retention from, these things? If you've got any data that could give us an indication of, if we're thinking, wow, that's interesting, I'm not sure if I'm brave enough, I need more evidence, Alan, as to the
Yeah, we
potential
don't have a
upside.
ton of data specifically on that point, just because I think, it's hard to say that person stayed.
That singular, yeah.
Right. But I think where we're going moving forward on this is seeing more internal mobility increase. Because if we feel like internal mobility is increasing, that is saving costs. But then where we're monitoring that voluntary attrition or resignation rate. So we're going to continue to monitor that. We do our exit surveys like everybody, our engagement surveys where they're focused on people first policies. The engagement scores are through the roof, right? They're super strong. So we feel like it's more of a soft correlation. We don't have the hard data, but we feel like that has been a big impact.
So using that as an example in our mind for a moment, taking it out more broadly, an individual, a leader in a department, observes something that they feel is no longer fit for purpose. Playbook that worked before, now not right. Mobility being 1, 6 months, etc. If they identify that, what's the process they go through to be able to make that adaptation, to make that change? Is that easy in the organization? How have you made that easy? Or is it still quite difficult, because obviously it's a large company, right, to make shifts? What's the level of change or autonomy given against people policies and things like that, certainly within your realm? Just give me a framework.
For us, I mean, it gets to listening to employees or people. So we do our people listening, and then bringing it up and letting leadership say, hey, we're hearing a lot of questions for this. We have a lot of qualitative feedback that we try to gather from folks. We listen to our leaders to say, hey, I'm struggling with talent retention here, or our attrition is spiking there. And that's why we've had upwards of 9 now progressive changes where it was all based off of people listening. We saw this, therefore let's do that. We had a rigid PTO practice. Well, now we're moving towards what we call recharge. Wide open, no formal PTO unless it's required in certain jurisdictions. And we're not just saying, oh, you get unlimited vacation, but we're actually saying you need to take a minimum of this, because they were saying, hey, that sounds great, but I've heard that people take less on PTO if that's the PTO policy. And so we said, okay, well, we'll make sure that is the floor versus the ceiling. So, and our chief people officer, or purpose officer, she's literally out there talking to employees saying, I'm taking this many weeks and you should too. That's practice what you preach, right?
Yeah, that's the role modeling. That's, right. Her sharing a picture on LinkedIn of, here I am flexible, here I am taking time out, so that we're able to, as you said, practice what we preach, show and role model those kinds of shifts and change. Now, I think what I find fascinating in every conversation I have with, execs, HR leaders, people who are dealing with these complex, lovely things called human beings, to navigate them through their careers, through an organization's journey, S&P 1888 or so at the, day one. I remember just reading recently the Jeff Bezos letters. Have you read the book, the Bezos letters? And where, the author, for those who aren't familiar with it, has looked back at all of the shareholder letters that Jeff has written and drawn their own conclusions of what's common there. And one of them that I found really profound was, we're at day one. So always being that day one mentality that anything is possible, we can create new, we can have, and there's a difference between, the leadership principles versus some of these principles out of the shareholders pieces. But are there any things that you've noticed, not necessarily just at S&P and just by this merger, but in your career, where organizations thrive because they've focused on particular kinds of skills or particular kinds of organizational design that can be sustained across the board? You've talked about people-centric first, about listening a lot. What are some of the things that have commonly come out of that that you can perhaps share with us as well?
I think even though we are a long tenured company, and as S&P Global, we're only branded that way for the past 6 years. If you were to look at what S&P was, obviously well before the IHS Markit merger, before SNL Financial was brought in, it was McGraw-Hill Financial. But it was McGraw-Hill that everybody thought was a book publisher, right? Or printer. Well, they said, we're more than this. We're going to spin off that piece and we're going to focus on the financial. We're going to rebrand as S&P because that is a core branding. That's the evolution of saying, hey, what we were yesterday doesn't mean it's what we want to be tomorrow. Even for a 100-plus-year-old organization, that adaptability and that ability to say, hey, we're always on day one. What's the next thing? And I think what we're doing today is to say, now in this new combined organization, what we were before, neither of those are correct. Neither of them are fit for purpose. We're building what we need to be tomorrow as this new combined organization. That means we need to be thinking about the future skills. That means we need to be thinking about what kind of org structures make sense for us. How are we effectively operating? And no leader that I've come across has said, my old way is the only way. That's a big change that I think, and the companies that are doing that are I think incredibly successful, right? Amazon is not a bookseller, right? To keep on Jeff Bezos, they saw something and benefited from it, and then they made moves to solidify their experience, right? AWS was an operating expense till it was now a $75 billion business line for Amazon, whatever the actual number is. That's learning from what your structure and what your operations are.
That's part of this adaption, that it happens in an environment. And so we have to, yes, understand what the skills are, what the characteristics are that manifest into products, services, but then also what is the environment. And it's often been the environment that has not really been listened to well enough because we're too navel gazing in ourselves. And if the environment doesn't change that quickly, we can get away with navel gazing for a few years before we look up. Now we can't do that anymore. We have to, as you've talked about, have this listening, have this ability to both predict, experiment, enjoy that kind of journey, and that reinvention, that Marshall Goldsmith's, what got us here won't get us there.
Exactly.
And I think it's easy when it's obvious. It's easy when it's a label up there. Mm-hmm. But when we're blind to it because we're inside the system, often we can't see what's no longer working, right. And we might think, no, we just need to persevere. And it's this, different skills and attributes between, oh yeah, having grit, we persevere for things, versus resilience, oh, we'll, bounce forward, we'll do these bits, versus, oh, the mental flexibility to go and try new things. I think the reality right now for leaders is living in that ambiguous paradox between those worlds.
Yep.
And how do you, where there is, we can sit here, smile, be happy, thinking, yes, it's great, all of these things are happening. But equally for those people who are sharing that, maybe on a bad day, they're almost at the end. They're at just 2 decisions away from a bad situation. So in the same way of a company thinking it's always day one, maybe this balance of thriving today, we're always only a few steps away from not thriving. So just balancing that act. So I was just thinking out loud as I was talking there, Alan, as to this thing called life, the life of companies, and the magic source of being able to continually adapt and reinvent. For a human being who might have been so wedded to, this is my identity, I'm a salesperson, I'm a insert role. When that role goes away, how do we support them? How do we support them to shift their role from who they are and their self-worth? Do you have any foresight about that coming up? Because there's some big things coming down the pike of where the bedrock of people's identity linking to a role is going to be decoupled. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes to me as an org effectiveness practitioner is like the half-life of skills is shrinking constantly. And so for me, and this is what I believe this personally on the things I do outside of work is preparedness, general preparedness. So I'm an avid CrossFitter. That's the game, is you do something different every day. You're going to work some weaknesses. You're going to strengthen some skills that you already have, but you're always going to be adaptable in whatever might come your way. And maybe someone throws a new thing in front of you and you've got to learn how to handle that new skill, learn how to play with something differently. For work, I think it's the same thing that applies. You're going to have some superpowers that you want to develop, but your ability to not define yourself by your role or that superpower, but that you can handle new things and that you're constantly trying to learn, be curious. We look for folks that have those type of behaviors as an organization, but I think that's going to be the superpower for folks that continue to adapt, especially I think in large enterprise organizations or large technology and product organizations, where I've spent, or financial services, where I've spent more time, is that ability to adapt and evolve yourself and be curious about that is gonna be what takes us into the next place. Because like I said, that half-life of skills, that role that you have today is going to evolve dramatically. Maybe it's digital skills, maybe it's structured problem solving that you need to develop to push your way through. It's only going to change more.
I'm going to give you another curveball of a question, Alan. And it's one that I ask each guest at the end. And it's related to what you've just been mentioning there, this endless curiosity to uncover what could be. Should we do it? It's the Jurassic Park question. Just because we could, we never asked whether we should. When was the last time you did something for the first time? And what was it?
The last time I did something for the first time. Oh, that is a really tough question. I think, I traveled internationally after I was like 25, probably because I didn't have any money before that. But that was the last time I did something for the first time, and that literally changed the trajectory of my life. Being able to go to another place and understand different people and a different culture. But that was a while ago. That was probably like 15 years ago.
It's interesting, isn't it? Where one of my first interviews with Diane Hamilton, and she developed out the curiosity index, curiosity code, and how we actually peak our curiosity at 5, according to a lot of her research. So it's your daughter, isn't it, who's 5?
Yeah.
where everything's novel, everything's new, we're discovering new things. And as we go through life, we have society that says, been there, done that, worn the t-shirt, done all of these things, to actually, where am I curious? Have I been to different places? Have I done different things? Or even, have I done the same thing, but with new eyes? And this opportunity to not just go on repeat, not just, every time we go and do, I do yoga each morning. Is it the first time I'm doing yoga? What would I behave like? What would I think? How would I behave? And I just like that idea in our work that we have this balance and bias towards knowledge, expertise, but in the world of new, uncertainty, different, it will favor those who are happy to be in the unknown, to happy to be, this is the first time I'm doing things. I don't have the answers, but I've got some principles that will help me navigate it. And so having those kind of ways. So is there anything else that you'd like to add in or thoughts from this around your perspective of how you've been focusing on adaptability as an organization in this merger in individuals and as an organization? Is there anything?
I think the last thing that I would say is for S&P Global is that it's not changing. Adaptability is now the core of how we need to think about ourselves as an organization, because if we are creating essential intelligence for the market, we don't know everything. Intelligence is only growing on an exponential curve. So we've got to be open and adaptable to finding out what is the right next thing and go get that information and that intelligence and that data. So that's super interesting because that's part of our purpose. But being able to live that and have your people understand that, that's just an amazing superpower to embed in 35,000 employees,
isn't it?
And then see how that flywheel works.
And I guess it links back to, using data to make great decisions. If people are using data to make investment decisions, on the S&P 500, all of these kind of things, you mentioned about skill half-life, company half-life, going from 60 years to 14 years on that list. My view, my prediction, whilst I bet, my mission on AQ being a predictor of future success, is that we'll have the AQ 500. The organizations that are most adaptable are going to be the ones that you want to invest in a exponential world. And so if we can understand the right data that understands individual, team, and organizational adaptability, I think that's the new frontier for opportunity of wealth creation with a thriving afterburn, not a, decimation afterburn. So if people want to get in touch with you, Alan, to explore maybe other peers or things about their journey, your journey, how would they best get in touch with you, Alan?
Yeah, I'm an active user on LinkedIn, so you can find me, Alan, Susi. I think there's only one, so I'm there, and not really on other social platforms, but yeah, feel free to follow and look to engage with anybody that's interested in the space or wants to talk more.
Wonderful. Thanks, Alan, for sharing your experience and journey. I look forward to more conversations with you over time, and true gratitude to you.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for having me.
I've just had to hit record again with Alan because we were just doing the wrap up and something hit him and I want him to share it. So the last time you did something for the first time, Alan, do you want a version 2 on that answer? Go for it.
Take 2. So recently, about a year and a half ago, in the middle of the pandemic, I started doing ice baths with hot sauna, very hot sauna, 220 degree, about 100 degrees Celsius saunas into ice baths for multiple minutes, contrasting back and forth. Talk about adaptability. Having to go between those extremes was wonderful because you learn a lot about yourself when you are in a bucket full of ice to your neck, trying to breathe.
Was it a Wim Hof inspired by any chance, Alan?
It is. XPT and Wim Hof
okay.
Do some of these things, and just amazing for the body and mind. But man, talk about building up your own personal resilience, how to handle yourself in tough situations. If you can handle that, you can pretty much handle anything. You're you're managing your autonomous nervous system pretty well at that point. So yeah, I wish I had given you that one the first time.
Well, you just have. You just have.
There we go, everybody.
And for me, all of these things, to build our muscles to deal with things that were different, to step out of the echo chamber of what every day looks like, builds up this tolerance of alien looking experiences and things becoming actually fun, going from to I choose to go and do it again. So all credit to you. Thanks, Alan. I just had to put that one in.
Thanks, Ross.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalised report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQME assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams and organisations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favourite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.